For many years, Final Fantasy games were well known for their innovative take on turn-based combat, but according to Yoshinori Kitase, who actually directed many of the games that made use of those innovative turn-based combat systems, those days are now long gone. Why? Well, he's now just said that they will not be implementing a modern turn-based combat system in future installments of the franchise. Kitase was speaking at the end of last year to the Edamame Arcade channel, a new YouTube channel being run by Tom Lee and Kabukin that's actually sponsored by Square Enix. He was taking part in a quickfire question interview where he had to respond to community questions with either a true or false paddle. And after being asked a fair few questions, he was then asked, when will we return to a truly modern turn-based combat? In response, he simply used the false paddle while actually looking a little bit sheepish. Now, I know that the gameplay within main series Final Fantasy games has become a rather prickly subject in recent years, especially when we're talking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I can't honestly say I'm all that surprised by Kitase's answer here. I mean, he didn't really attempt to add any kind of wiggle room to his answer, as he did in relation to some of the other questions in the interview. This was a very definite no. As a side note here, weirdly enough, we are actually working on a huge video right now that will delve into the evolution of the Final Fantasy battle system. And I think it makes quite a bit of sense to surface some of that right now, because the truth is that Square Enix has been actively looking to move towards a more action-oriented style of gameplay for quite some time now. I mean, you could even trace this trend back to pretty soon after the franchise was conceived way back in the 1980s. Sure, the initial basis for combat was the rather popular Dungeons & Dragons, but they swiftly moved away from this after only a few iterations. Hiroyuki Ito was one of the driving forces behind this through the creation of the active time battle system that was used in Final Fantasy IV, which, as he said himself, was actually designed to give people the illusion that the game was more action focused than it actually was. But Yoshinori Kitase and also Tetsuya Nomura have also been heavily involved with the push towards action-oriented gameplay, for better or for worse, even if they didn't actually plan the systems themselves. If we're looking at Kitase, well, there have been big changes that have happened throughout a lot of the games that he's been involved with, but these really started to take effect, at least with the core gameplay systems, with the first game he directed on the PlayStation 2, Final Fantasy X. This saw them move away from the classic ATB system that had served the series so well over the previous two consoles, thanks to the creation of the conditional turn-based battle system. This was the brainchild of Toshiro Tsuchida, and on face value, it was a more methodical battle system than we'd seen for quite a while, because it removed the active element that had become so ingrained with combat. But in my opinion at least, it actually ended up making the gameplay feel much more fast-paced and action-oriented. Because turns were now based on individuals on either side of the fence, the removal of the time bar meant that there was no longer any waiting around, unless that's what you chose to do. If you wanted, you could input commands very quickly and have the whole gameplay experience play out as a rather fluid one, and this was only amplified when using mechanics such as haste and quick hit. With Final Fantasy X Part 2, they then reverted back to a much more sophisticated version of the ATB system, which was created by Takatsugu Nakazawa, who had previously worked on Final Fantasy VII, VIII, and X's battle systems. He now made it so that enemy attacks could be interrupted, and attacks could also be chained together. It meant that Final Fantasy X Part 2's battle system was, at least in my opinion, one of the best examples of the ATB system that's ever been created. It was fast, fluid, and just felt really satisfying, especially when combined with the Dressphere system. With Final Fantasy XIII, Kitase turned once again to Toshiro Tsuchida as they attempted to push Final Fantasy gameplay to its most extreme heights and craft something even better. To try and accomplish this, Tsuchida combined elements of the ATB system and the Active Dimension system that was introduced in Final Fantasy XII to create the Command Synergy battle system. The result was something that was much more fast-paced than anything we'd ever seen before. It built upon the notion of automation that was introduced by Final Fantasy XII, but took away the ability to modify what your party members did at a granular level. So instead of having to think about either casting Cure on a specific character, or the need to set up a specific gambit to accommodate for a scenario where a character needed healing, you just had to make sure you had someone with the medic paradigm active, and then hope that they do what you needed them to do when they took their turn. Now, as I mentioned, each of these games was created under the watchful guise of Yoshinori Kitase, as he acted as either the director or with the later games, the producer. But these changes and his influence weren't just isolated to the main series titles, as both Kitase and Tetsuya Nomura wanted the company to strive towards new gameplay experiences, specifically related to action. In the early 2000s, for example, Kitase fell in love with first-person shooters that were popular in the West, like Half-Life and Medal of Honor, and despite having next to no real experience developing games with such a strong focus on action, he wanted to try and bring them over to Japan. He felt that by integrating classic RPG elements, that they could achieve this, and the experiment relating to this particular line of thinking ended up being Dirge Cerberus. Tetsuya Nomura, on the other hand, has always had a preference for action-oriented gameplay, as seen by his first directorial role, Kingdom Hearts. He was also the creative driving force behind the first Dissidia title, which, as a fun aside, actually began life as a Kingdom Hearts spin-off game, and lest we also forget that the full-on action gameplay that we ended up getting with Final Fantasy XV was also Nomura's vision, way back when it was conceived as Final Fantasy Versus 13. Crisis Core, another brainchild of Kitase and Nomura and part of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, was also envisioned to be a full-on action game, but was changed during development because they realised they just didn't have the technical competencies to accommodate for creating such a game at that time. But following its release, Hajime Tabata's team was transitioned over to being purely action-focused. After Crisis Core, they went on to develop The Third Birthday, Final Fantasy Type 0, and of course they delivered upon Nomura's vision for Final Fantasy XV, which saw the creation of the active cross-battle system. The Final Fantasy VII Remake? Well, that's just the latest piece of this ever-evolving puzzle, as Tetsuya Nomura has been pretty clear that the game will not be turn-based, and will instead have a heavy focus on action. He said that he even wants the combat to be similar to what we've seen in the new Dissidia title, and as if his words aren't enough, they've even moved Mitsunori Takahashi onto the project as the lead battle planner. And for your reference, he previously worked on Kingdom Hearts 2 as well as directing Dissidia Duodecim on the PlayStation Portable. It's why, as I said at the start of the video, that I therefore don't feel as though Kitase's words were all that surprising. But that's not to say we won't see iterations of turn-based systems or indeed the active time battle system appear in other places. World of Final Fantasy, for example, used the AXB system to great effect by allowing players to speed up the combat, and we may even see it appear in other titles in the future. Kitase's own Mobius Final Fantasy also adopted a turn-based battle system for its gameplay. It's just likely that we won't see these kind of systems as a big focus for them as a company with their premium titles, especially when we think about this particular franchise. How do I feel personally about this? Honestly, I'm not too bothered which system they go for. I just want them to pick a system and build upon it, like they used to. Back in the so-called good old days, there was clear, coherent development of the battle system between games, and this approach catered for both newcomers to the franchise and those who were veterans returning to experience a new title. Now, I appreciate that Final Fantasy XV was something of a red herring from this perspective, as it started off life as a spin-off and wasn't ever supposed to have as much influence over the future of the franchise as it's ended up having. But if that's where they see it going now, I hope they just stick with it and don't promote something entirely different for the next game. If they don't want to build on Final Fantasy XV system though, then I really hope they at least go back to one of the previous systems and build upon that instead. And by previous systems, I'm referring to either what we saw in Final Fantasy X Part 2, Final Fantasy XII, or something from the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. My only concern with that though, is that they just came out such a long time ago now, whereas Final Fantasy XV is much more current. Either way, what do you guys think? Should Square Enix abandon their quest towards creating action-orientated gameplay experiences with their main Final Fantasy titles and go back to their turn-based ways? Or are you happy with the way that things are progressing? Also, what do you think has been the best Final Fantasy battle system ever created? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We've also got a giveaway going on at the moment to celebrate the start of the year. Be sure to check out our recent video to see how you can enter and give yourself a chance of winning some 30th anniversary plushies or even a Christmas Moogle. And if you guys enjoy the content that we create, then please consider supporting us on Patreon. Not only will you get access to exclusive giveaways, you also get that warm, fuzzy feeling that comes with knowing that you are helping us out. These guys you're seeing now have already chosen to support us, so why not consider joining them? Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. I hope you've enjoyed this video update, and I'll see you guys all soon for more Final Fantasy coverage.